In a conversation about the 2020 Democrats on this program, one of our frequent and favorite guests brought up a point that I found fascinating. Here's what she said.
There's something about Elizabeth Warren that doesn't translate on television. I think this is true of all women candidates, actually.
All women?
I think that there's a gender lens that we all have overlaid when we're watching women, particularly when they're trying to be in positions of leadership. We judge them differently. We say things like, she's just not warm, or like, I don't like her voice, or her laugh, right? As if, you know, Bernie Sanders or any of these other folks have warm voices and great laughs.
So, wanted to bring her back to dig into that conversation. Here's Zerlina Maxwell. She's the former director of progressive media for the Clinton campaign. She's also an MSNBC political analyst. We also invited Lauren Leader, the co-founder and CEO of All In Together. It's an organization geared toward encouraging civic engagement by women. And the point that you made here, it deserved a little bit more time, so I wanted to dig into it a little bit. How does a female candidate overcome the obstacles that you described?
Well, I think that you have to have a strategic plan, and then you have to stick to it. So you see that in some of what Elizabeth Warren is doing. She's not listening to some of the media noise and speculation or even advice from outsiders. She's just sticking to her plan. And I think that the challenges that women face, they're in two buckets. I think of it as a cultural bucket and a structural bucket. So cultural is implicit biases that we may have.
That we all have.
That we all have, because we are all raised in patriarchy. It's everywhere. And so we have implicit biases against women and seeing them in positions of leadership. We associate women in positions of leadership with negative traits like aggressive or angry or bitchy, right? Sorry.
I think you can say that.
Can I say that?
Yeah.
The second bucket is structural. So that means it's harder for women candidates to raise money. It takes them longer. That's why you have organizations like Emily's List that get money into the hands of women candidates early in the race. And so I think they have structural challenges to overcome in the area of finances, but it also takes them longer to gain the trust of voters because we're not used to seeing women in positions of leadership as often.
Lauren, polling by your organization, recent polling, if I'm not mistaken, was done back in August, just a few weeks ago. It saw heightened engagement by women. I think we've got the numbers here. 56% of Democratic women said they were paying more attention to politics since 2016. In your same polling, women are more likely to expect a Democrat to beat Trump. But if the Democratic nominee is a woman, voters give Trump the edge.
Yeah.
Walk us through that dynamic.
Yeah, well, I think it was a very similar, we saw a very similar dynamic in these gender questions that we saw when Obama was running the first time, that the voters would say that they themselves were comfortable voting for a black president, but they feared that their neighbors were not and that they wouldn't. And you saw the very similar dynamics. We've never had a woman president. And so there is this anxiety, and it's particularly high among white women. So when we dug into the data, women of color actually have a high degree of confidence that a woman can win in the presidential cycle against Trump. It's white women particularly that just fear that there's that same bias, which we all see and live and experience, is going to sink a woman's chances, a generic woman running against Trump in 2020.
But why would a white woman fear that more than a woman of color?
Well, it's really interesting. Part of it is correlated with the political activism of women of color versus white women. So, you know, even though we saw this huge surge of political activism, you know, since 16, white suburban women, for instance, who were such a force in the 2018 midterms, the fact is that women of color have outvoted every other group of Americans for the last, 30 plus years, and they're the most politically engaged. So what we've found is that women of color are more likely actually to go out and work for a campaign. They're more likely to go volunteer. They're more likely to give money to campaign. They're more likely to do all of the ancillary sort of civic leadership actions that it takes to get people elected. So I think part of that optimism comes from a sense of being on the ground and working for it. And that's where the difference is. Overwhelmingly, women want to see a woman president. They want to see women elected. The question is, how hard are they going to work to make that a reality? And it can't just be about, clicking on a page on Facebook. They got to go out and work. They got to raise the money. They got to give the money. They got to volunteer.
Zerlina, I thought of you, I think it was last week, Elizabeth Warren at that town hall would ask the question at the LGBTQ forum.
The lean.
I think we have it. We'll play it, and then I'm going to get your take.
The supporter approaches you and says, Senator, I'm old-fashioned, and my faith teaches me that marriage is between one man and one woman. What is your response?
Well, I'm going to assume it's a guy who said that. And I'm going to say, then just marry one woman. I'm cool with that. Assuming you can find one.
How would a guy have answered that question, do you think?
I don't know how a guy would have answered that question, but I think one of the things that's so great about that moment was it's just her authentic personality.
So authentic.
And, you know, I use the word authentic because we don't often associate that with women.
Yeah.
We use it as code language when we really mean, well, we just don't like, we don't want to say the sexist things that we're thinking. And so we say, well, I don't trust her, or she's not authentic. And I think that being yourself is the most empowering thing that Elizabeth Warren is doing.
That authenticity is actually, I think, why she is doing so incredibly well.
Yeah.
And it is a very deep contrast to Hillary Clinton, how she ran in 2016, which was that she tried to be perfect in a lot of ways. And I think the women today are embracing their imperfection, are embracing their authenticity, are being human, because they know that that's actually how women break through a lot of the bias that gets held against them.
We're going to continue this conversation. We'll have it a few times
Good.
over the next year. So thank you. Thanks for coming in, Selena. Always good to have you. It is